there's a lot of, perhaps, justifiably, fear. I think that one of the things we have been successful in doing is that the way in which we've used violence has meant that a lot of people are still expecting violence. So that a lot of them are still fearful that some repercussions will come to them just by speaking out about the experiences. So we're getting, for those who are brave enough would say hide my identity or things like that. But for most other people are afraid that something more would happen to them, even if they volunteer their story and speak on it. So what we've put in place and kind of trying to reassure people is that for those who are willing and want to opt out of any conversations about, remedies against the state, then we just want to be able to hear the story. We want to be able to document it, for posterity's sake. So, combining the approaches and making sure that people should be able to tell their stories and still want to keep the anonymity, it's one of the things we have to balance in getting the full story out of what happened.
If you find out the information you're looking for, then what?
In the past few years, we've seen so many of these instances, and we have several human rights organizations in this town. Many of them, in fact, just returned with the Minister of Justice from Geneva, the Human Rights Committee. What we haven't ever done is go into the community and be able to speak to people and gather this information. Because it is important for just accuracy in building a nation that you're able to document these stories, to be able to understand what is happening and to understand the trends. It's only then that we can have a full conversation about situations. When can the military be deployed? Who has the commanding authority to be able to deploy the military? For what and what can they do that? Then we can set in protocols. For instance, several armies across the country, across the world, have clear manuals and protocols as to who can be able to make that decision.
Right.
I think the logic across the world, and even in Ghana, behind why we have civilian control over the military, is that the military can never on its own make that decision. If it is about external peacekeeping decision and decision to join a peacekeeping as a troop contributing country, has to be made by political actors before the operating mandate or order is given to the military to be able to act on it. It is about declaring war. Our constitution has mechanisms for how war can be declared and through parliament. Before then, generals are brought into the conversation. In the same way, when you look at the constitution, it says the military's role is for external defense, and that it might be engaged in things within Ghana for purposes of development of the country as the president determined. Clearly, within that is that the military has no legal authority of its own to be able to intervene in a local community in any part of the country without presidential authorization, in effect. One of the things we have done to be able to devolve that presidential authorization is to create the National Security Council, or the Security Council framework. So at the national, regional, and district, we've devolved an element of that power to presidential representatives. So, for instance, in Nigeria, our understanding was that the Ashanti regional minister says that he gave, that order. But the logic is that there has to be civilians making that decision and not leaving it to military men to be able to do that.
In this case, it was the military high command.
In this case, our understanding from them is that the military high command made that decision. In every understanding of our constitutional framework, that is in fact what happens in a coup d'etat situation. That the military high command can never do that or take any decision on its own unless it's purporting or acting to overthrow the government. So that's one of the reasons why we sent the right to information request to the presidency to demand answers as to whether the president was aware, whether he authorized, participated in the decision. That has to be clear for posterity. But also within that conversation, one of the reasons why we have really assured that this was an operation across board, and we've been speaking to various folks within the military to be able to understand how they operate. They made us understand that first, we saw helicopters being deployed. That could only come from the Air Force. We saw
MOAC.
We saw the MOAC, which could only come from the reconnaissance unit.
Right.
You saw troop carrying vehicles, which could have come from the 1st Battalion in
1BM Michel Camp,
or 5th Battalion from Bemaka. So it tells you that this was an operation on air levels, on all levels, involving different units within the military. And the only people who can be able to do this is to get an operative mandate on the military high command. So we understand their culpability. They have themselves admitted it. Our role is to be able to document this in a well put together report. And that report obviously verifying the stories of people that has happened, being able to understand the chain of command and how things evolved, what kind of risk assessment was done before deploying the person.
So it was intelligence based. That's what we're talking.
So you have to interrogate the speak of intelligence based, because intelligence means nothing. I mean, and in my case, the police so many times have come to court and saying that we've picked up intelligence that, and what they are referring is that they've read my Facebook post. So the language of intelligence is used to cloud, and kind of put people off and think that there's some real work that has gone into this. So yeah, we have to be able to ask those questions for us to be able to reform attitudes and how we retire violence.
Would you be surprised if the information you're seeking from the presidency through the right to information comes and the presidency says, well, we were not aware, we were not in the loop? Would you be surprised?
I am actually expecting them not to respond. I think that it has been the attitude of a number of officers to not cooperate with the right to information framework. So, for instance, national security, for instance, don't even bother responding to whether it's us, anybody, or even the Right to Information Commission entirely. I'm expecting the presidency to take the same approach on this. But one of the things that we pick up and put on ourselves in having these conversations is, as we anticipate what would happen, to be prepared to go the full haul. And that means that testing the entire framework of our entire constitutional framework through the court system and through everything. For the courts, if they agree with the presidency, then it's do that. Listen, the fish is rotting all throughout, not only just at the top. But our commitment is that even if the president acts in a particular way or the other, we'll be able to go the full haul. Now, in the event that the presidency comes and says that we were not aware of this, that's even a bigger problem, I think. That the military high command could deploy forces in the way that they did without any reference to the commander-in-chief. It is undermining of the commander-in-chief's authority. And I think that we have to sit with that reality and kind of contend with what that really means for our democracy.
We're still looking for whoever deployed the men into the chamber of parliament. And we have not found that individual. What makes you think that you could find the answers you're looking for?
Well, I don't know whether have we asked the question and have we tried to find the answer? Because what we're expecting is that information will be willingly provided to us. I have never seen that sort of level of transparency come from a lot of government institutions in this country. But it requires some dogged pursuit of the information and consistency in dealing with it. Like, for instance, this thing on Caleb Kuda, where we asked for information from the Ministry of National Security, we still haven't gotten the information.
Really?
But yes, I mean, it's been how many years now? I think almost 2 years since the incident. They have been fined by the Right to Information Commission. They've been given 14 days to produce the information. They still haven't complied. Then we have to go to the next step. So I think for us, the approach is that just stay on it. And that's the only way in which you can achieve results, we think.
See, William.
Yeah, I wanted to find out, in terms of representation, the Commander-in-Chief of the Ghana Armed Forces is represented, if my understanding is right, also by the Minister of Defense at some level. So if the Minister of Defense had given the go-ahead or he was aware, what difference will it make in trying to get to understand whether the president was informed or not? I just wanted to understand that.
So one of the things where we are trying to get is the protocols that exist within the military. I mean, we are really close to getting that information. We are doubtful as to the capacity of the Minister of Defense to be able to give that command. If he had that authority, then that's...
In fact, Dr. Nyahota Maklo, who's a retired captain, when I interviewed him, said that the military high command consists of the president, who is the commander-in-chief, all the service chiefs, the CDS, and two other persons I can't remember at this point. So
I'm just talking about the position of the defense minister in this matter.
Right.
So, I mean, I've heard the defense minister speak, I've heard the deputy defense minister speak. None of them claim to have been aware or have participated in the decision. To be fair, they are justifying the conduct, and which is disappointing enough. In many places, that would have been enough to request for their resignations. But hey, resignations seems alien to conversations and speak in this republic in many ways.
And now, Oliver, we spoke on, I think it was on Friday, you had put out a number for persons affected to get in touch if they wanted some legal assistance. On that front, what is it looking like? What has the uptake been like? Or has the fear of further violence, stopped people from getting in touch? You also then mentioned even a young girl, you say, who was affected by all of this. Speak to us about what you've gathered since opening up the phone lines.
So we have 350 people who we have their contacts and details, and we are moving forward with. But our interest is to be comprehensive. So, for instance, yesterday we put up a call for more volunteers because we want to be able to reach places when individuals who we have not been able to reach yet. We know that there's a lot more people. There are certain persons who we've spoken to who haven't reached out yet, and we haven't added them to the list. We know that they are still in the hospital. There's one individual, for instance, apparently has intestinal issues, still admitted in the hospital. So there are a number of people yet that we want to be able to do the outreach and meet them. Yes, I talked about a young girl as well. One of the things we're trying to do is to even categorize how many minors were affected by this. We have a rough estimate of 10, but it's information that we need to be able to verify how many women were caught up in this. Last time we met, there were several women who came up as well who were affected by this. Some women, for instance, some people had given us their contacts. They don't live in the community. So for this phase of what we are doing, our interest is to be as comprehensive and thorough as possible to be able to first establish the full facts of what happened. Then we can move on to the next stage about what representation.
Are you planning to take the military to court?
I think for me, first of all, at this point, the real interest is to telling the story. Once we've been able to gather that information, yes, of course, there are other persons as well. Lawyer Emmanuel Kumade of Nichupi, who is also providing legal representation to a number of people. They have to determine what the best approach is, whether or not, and the process involves the victims as well being centered in the conversation about how we approach in terms of remedy issues. That whether litigating the issue and suing the Ghana Armed Forces would be the way to go, or agreeing to sit down for them to be properly compensated will be the way to go. But that's a conversation that has to be holistic in every respect. If it's decided to sue the military, it's an option that we are not taking off the table, and I think that, for me, would be my preferred option, to have the court weigh in as well. The
military statement puts some elements of the finding slabs of suspected Indian hemp. Somebody said that sounds like a justification of whatever they did, even though the murder of the soldier was unfortunate as well. What do you say? I'm sure you've seen the statement, read it over and over again.
When I was growing up, I always said I wanted to go into comedy. I was inspired by KSM and others, right. And I'm a huge consumer of Dave Chappelle, and he said something about how when the police encounter black folks and shoot them, then quickly they say sprinkle crack on him. And I think that's exactly what we're doing here, where the military has decided that, how can we make this story sensational by deciding that we've found some mysterious slabs of weed and whatnot. We don't know where they are. In fact, nobody knows. If they said there were individuals who were within this group where they found the slaps and whatever on them, well, they've released everybody, and they had an obligation to be able to report crime as they found it, which they haven't done. So I don't know whether they are serving themselves to whatever slabs they said they found, or whether in fact it exists. I'm doubtful that in fact they did that, because the nature of how things happen and evolved, there wasn't any proper search of homes. A lot of people were dragged out of their beds. Things were destroyed in the process and all of that. There was never any team, forensic team that was, trying to preserve evidence or anything like that. It's very doubtful.
The claim of the police is that they were investigating this matter. Just around the same time, the military stepped in with, brute force to do whatever they did. Do you think that the police spoke belatedly?
No, I don't think so. In fact, in conversations on the ground, a lot of what the police are saying has been verified. Our understanding is that immediately the incident happened, they had already invited the lady, the late soldier had visited for questioning, and were already going through that process. They communicated formally to the military that the individual, the deceased, appeared to have military apparel, and so was likely a member of the military, and asked them to identify the person. So on all fronts, I don't think so. If there's anything I'm disappointed about, is that the police have taken sort of an institutional stance that anytime the military is doing anything, even if it is gross violations of human rights, they're going to keep quiet on it and look the other way. And I think that's where I'm a bit frustrated by. Now, I know that a lot of people have said that, well, if the police were to intervene, it could lead to an escalation. But I think that a lot of people were calling the police officers, and the police were like, there's nothing we can do. If the police then deployed officers there and asked them to stand down, just give the order. If the people refuse, at least you have formally made a request for them to stand down from what they're doing. I think it is important, and that's something we have to rethink. What happens when the military go rogue? What is the role of the law enforcement agency in those situations, and how do they deal with that? Subsequently to it, we still haven't heard anything from them as to what they are going to do with regarding prosecuting or investigating the crime. They haven't taken any steps in that regard. Again, that's in itself also disappointing. There are individuals who went to the police station, and certain police officers were telling them, were refusing to give them medical forms or to take down their statements, saying that, nothing will come out of this. Right. Go home. And, it doesn't show that. Police. Yeah, that's from police officers, right? It doesn't show the level of professionalism we require in situations like this. So those things, beyond how they conducted themselves with regard to the investigating the killing of the trooper, it is also important how they tend towards the civilians population in order to reassure them and take and be duly diligent in how they conduct themselves.
Are we providing psychosocial support for these over 300 people who you have engaged thus far?
So I want to be grateful to Professor Appiagyei Tuah of the University of Ghana, associate professor there, who has had conversations with the Ghana Psychological Association, I think it's called GPA, who have indicated to us a willingness to support and send somebody to the ground. Tomorrow, for instance, we're meeting in the community. We understand that there are some logistical and financial constraints as well, which could affect the level of support they're able to provide. But at least they have indicated a willingness to support, and we are hoping that we can start something in that regard.
Who is funding all of what you're doing?
So far, I have received from individuals who've voluntarily walked into our inboxes. One person sent 500 CDs, and man, I know he hasn't asked me to put out his name, but I feel like I have to, because one of the first individuals, Samson Yanini, sent us 1,000 Ghana cedis, right. Sent a pupil from his law firm to support the efforts, and I think I'm very grateful to him, because he's been supportive in a lot of things which we haven't talked about publicly, and he hasn't ever mentioned publicly, but that sort of support is useful. Beyond that, nothing else. I'm consistently calling various NGOs and various organizations in the country and sending email to be able to support the fact-finding process, because we need recorders, we need videography, we need all of those things to be able to be effective in what we are trying to do.
Are we just focusing on the victims in Ashaiman and not the military's perspective, because a soldier has been killed? We spent resources to train this soldier. The soldier has family. We heard his mother speak that was her only hope, if you will. Are we just focusing on the victims in Ashaiman who were caught up in the fire and not the soldier?
So one of the things which is clear to me, that institutionally and the resources of this country have been put to the service of this family and the military, because we're investigating that, we are putting the person to court. There was a whole, I think at the funeral, there was a lot of military support and all of that. What we haven't done as a country and institutionally is to be able to support victims. So in fact, disproportionately in terms of state resources, is focused on one and not the victims. What we are doing is trying to pick up the slack of what is not happening. And so even in terms of distribution of efforts and energy, I think that the weight really is on the number of individuals who have been affected. But even in conversations, right, I remember with your colleague, Okanse, I mentioned the sort of how disgraceful it is that the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces did not speak and to not even the family of the victim, of the trooper, and also say anything about it. And I think that it's a shame, really, because, I mean, at the end of the day, a young man has lost his life in circumstances that nobody should on our streets.
What do you assume would be the cause for the president's silence?
Man, over the past two years, I've kind of learned to expect very little from from the individual. I really don't know what makes him tick. I don't know. He's not pushed by any of the constitutional restraints we have in place. He's not pushed by voices in civil society. He's been pushed by so little that I feel like it's easier to predict what he does as easy as it is to win the lottery. So I don't know. I honestly can't speculate.
If at the end of the day, all of what you're doing doesn't yield the envisaged results you're looking for, what will be your next move?
I think the result for a lot of people is that sometimes you feel like you're losing your mind to see these things happen and not seeing anybody speak about it. And I've always said that my advocacy for myself is the way in which I keep my mental health in check. And somebody says asylum. But yeah, like a lot of people want to see that there's civic voices in this country and there are persons who, when these things happen, do not cower in fear and kind of immediately want to provide responses that so many people can identify it. That in itself is important, I think. Just feeling reassured that there's something good about this country. But the process of trying to document and understand the full scale of what has happened is a progress in terms of how we've dealt with past incidents. We haven't ever done that before. And being able to collate this information and digest this is important for how we move forward. Now, everybody who is involved in the kind of what we are doing, it requires the modesty to understand that every time you're trying to push the country in a particular direction, that forces who are not interested in that direction would push back. The process of the back and forth, hopefully when it crosses the line of the side of good, leads to progress. When it pushes back, hopefully history will be interested in correcting the errors of the past. But we're all contributing to a historical continuum of how we improve our democracy.
Helen has a question, though, but you have been at the forefront of the Fix the Country movement. Is it working?
You know, when we started, one of the things we were saying consistently is that we're trying to have a conversation, well, not with the state or elected officials, but with the people of Ghana. And we're still people facing and having conversations with people. And I think in that process of having that conversation with people, there's a lot more people who day to day reach out and want to know how they can help and support. That drive, a spurge of civic interest in doing something about the Republic, in helping and supporting, that's useful to how you build a democratic culture. So I think on that front, our interest in creating that protest culture and a culture of accountability within the citizenry is yielding fruits. Is it at the rate at which we expect?
Right.
It's no. Because a lot of the times we are resource deficient. We're expecting that our voices on radio alone will carry what we are doing. But a lot of times it requires boots on the ground, mobilizing in communities and things like that. We're able to do that, in Tamale for three months consistently, but there's so many other tamales across the country, right? But we don't have the means to be able to do that on a grand scale. But I think the most important thing for us is that I don't anticipate a situation whereby Fix the Country alone is able to cover the entire country. Our interest and expectation is that there's a lot more of these initiatives that pop up in so many spaces that are dealing with specific thematic issues and things like that. Those are the things that keep a nation on its rails.
What you have catalogued for me, somebody would say, is because you have had news of a broken front. Some of the people you started with seem to have broken ranks with you. Is that the case? And can that be blamed on the snail pace?
No, absolutely
journey towards
not,
the results you're looking for?
Absolutely not. In fact, from the very beginning, one of the things we had a conversation about, and particularly in studying sort of like examples that are happening in Latin America, is understanding that energies dip. That even if you have 100 people who are leading this and working with this, people get exhausted. The people who get disenchanted as to whether this is going on. The most important thing is to replenishing your ranks, not expecting that those who started must necessarily complete it as evidence of progress. No, I think that we have put a lot more emphasis in bringing people who from the initial beginnings were not even part of what we're doing, but are joining up. That's what we have focused on. But in terms of like sort of the whole entire holistic Fix the Country conversation, for instance, Economic Fighters League said they want to mobilize people to contest elections. Main reason for why we said we want to go into a different approach, that our interest in the beginning is not how do we replicate a party framework. And so if that's what the interest is, it's a useful conversation to have. Young people need to get in politics. And so continue that I suppose that on a different front and in a different way. But it shouldn't detract from persons who want to stay apolitical and persons who want to pursue the pursuit in a different way.
Ellen?
I'm just taking it back quickly to Ashaiman. And when we spoke on Friday, we talked about public opinion. And public opinion at that time seemed very divided. You had some people that said, well, the military need to assert themselves and respect for the uniform is waning and so on and so forth. I'm not sure if that is changing or has changed now that we're getting more details and more information is emerging. Does that dishearten you, or does that make you want to ramp up the advocacy? Because even where you're fighting for the people, the pushback seems very, very strong.
Yeah. You know, it's very difficult to sustain a democratic culture where a lot of people are not, in fact, Democrats. And I think that the general Ghanaian population, I suppose in many ways, is still learning the ropes of what it is to live in a genuine democratic culture. And it's surprising because a lot of people even shared conversations that have happened within even our law schools and lawyers we are training. And all of them are very dismissive of what happened in Ashaiman in a way that completely surprised me. You know, it shows you the grand scale of what we are doing with. That as an entire society, we don't have a genuine moral revulsion to what happened, that those who will be for it will be on the fringes. We're not seeing that. It tells you the work that needs to be done. And I think that for me, when I see things like that, it's only a reminder of the challenges rather than an invitation to wrap up, clean up my hands and walk home. But I think in all respect though, that I have noticed some shift, particularly when the police issued their statement, that I am seeing either those who were for the military become more quiet or that a lot more people are changing their minds. It could be either of them, but at least it's encouraging in many respects. Yes. And it shows you the dividends that can happen when institutions are working the way the citizens expect. Because a lot of people were reacting from the basis that they don't actually believe the police can do anything.
Right.
And that kind of like, you know what, they're justified to do so. And maybe a harboring and a sentiment that if they had their way, they'll be taking the law into their own hands on multiple times that they expect the police to act for them and they don't.
Yeah. Counsel, you and I were having a conversation just before we got onto the microphones, and you made the point that you were a member of the New York Bar, where renewal of licenses and so on and so forth were required. That you do a certain number of hours of pro bono work, which is a system to ensure that some of these things, are done. Because as you said, people are in law school who are lawyers, and you expect them to. But the system in New York is checking that by encouraging them to do pro bono before they keep their licenses and so on. Do we have such a system in the country? And if we don't have, what do you advocate? What do you suggest?
No, we don't. In fact, a lot of times it's really, really difficult to get lawyers to want to pick up some of these public interest matters. I remember when Apiati happened and the community was literally bombed out.
Right.
I had kind of said that, you know what, I'm fatigued. And my hope is that other lawyers will be able to step in and take some initiative on this. It never happened. We tried to have conversations which were set up between some international law firms and myself as to whether they can step in and help support. Because we're looking at the criminal liability or civil liability outside of Ghanaian courts as well internationally. Those conversations, they were also looking for funding to be able to support the process, and we weren't able to get the funding required, so we couldn't move on that. But yeah, I think there has to be an institutional or a legislative design that requires that before lawyers renew their licenses every year, they are required to show and demonstrate some hours of pro bono. Yeah, for New York Bar, I'm required to show 50 hours to show that, I've done pro bono work. We don't have that, and so a lot of people are like, I'm making my money first, and I don't want to pick up these causes.
The government has defaulted in paying back the bonds that have matured. And we're moving away from Ashaiman now. This is contrary to the promise that was made to the individual bondholders that from the 13th, they will start receiving their monies, because we know that in February, I think February 20 or so, some bonds matured and it was carried forward. What do you say about that?
I think on the question of default, government defaulting on its responsibility, we're going to see it occurring every time the coupons mature and are due for payment.
Why are you saying that?
No, I mean, just by studying the finances and economics of it, that the government's ability to pay these things would always be strained. They themselves said as much in terms of the statement they issued, making that promise that it was going to be dependent on, the government's ability to do so and things like that. One of the things I was surprised by, because I remember when the pensioners picketed, and one of the things we said that if the picket holds for X number of days, then we'll try to join them to support them. And then the finance minister shows up there and says to them, I don't even understand why you guys are here. We've already told you can self-exempt. What is the point of all of this? Right?
Yeah.
And then I interjected and said, maybe because they don't trust you. And it was the whole Hilobalu. Oh, is he a pensioner? Why did he show up there? And then I think after the incident, I heard a number of people saying that, we're having a cordial conversation with the finance minister and interjected and said something. And I was surprised by the extent to which, having listened to officials speak for so long and knowing that officialdom never follows up on his word, the extent to which people were willing to kind of just give up. We're like, okay, we've heard you and we're willing to go home. I think if we ever took that lax approach with anything that we were told, first, the country would never have started to begin with. I remember when we first started having the conversation and we were sent to that cabinet meeting, the government's response was, you know what, we'll fix all. No, actually, formally, they said, let us create a committee, we'll put some of you on the committee. We can use a committee, we can deal with this issue, we can look at it, forget this whole demonstration business and all of that. We didn't take them at their word. We said, no, you can do all of that, and we can also continue to do civic activism in support of what you're saying, right? So I think it demands, and I'm surprised that, I know that, for instance, Senor Hosi ran into some trouble when he went to say that, maybe people were being unreasonable with the finance minister, and he's done what he could. The extent to which we are willing to be always doubtful of official speak would be a test of how we succeed in extracting demands and progress from them.
The government says fix yourselves when you started Fix the Country. In fact, they brought up delivery.gov. Dr. Bawumia came to tell us 77 things that had been achieved by the government. And that was all in the bid to move us away from the province of misinformation or disinformation. Now, a new portal has been launched under the umbrella of the ISD to combat misinformation, where it's just been told by Edward Bauer that even the document for gold for oil and all those information about whether the oil sitting, in a vessel somewhere at our ports actually comes from Russia, it belongs to us. They don't know anything. If you juxtapose the two situations where government says we want to fight misinformation, but the same government is not supplying information, what do you say?
I'm a very literary person. I read a lot. And a lot of the times the book I make a lot of references to 1984 by George Orwell, where it's like you're in an alternate universe, that a bigger purveyor of false news and fake news is telling you that I am providing the tools to cure fake news. I'm like, wait, what? I think somebody used the word gaslighting, and I think that's exactly what is happening on many fronts. But the thing about information, and particularly misinformation, occurs where there's a void of information. And the void particularly is occasioned by persons who are holders of information, like a lot of government institutions, who are always being, I even say it, very liberal with the truth and information when they do put it out. Like, for instance, this whole conversations you were having about the oil, gold for oil, right? Like this, there's always, every time this news comes up, there's always something new you have to discover behind the pomp and pageantry. This is what the problem is consistently. So I think the biggest way in which you can solve misinformation is being upfront and honest as to this is the entire information and this is it. The same thing happened with the vaccines, for instance. And it's like, I remember there's this thing in the Bible. I can't remember who says, do you think that we cannot provide you what I think was Moses or something? Yeah. And then it's like, we've provided you the vaccines. And it's like, wait, okay, so Nigeria gave us some vaccines. At least be upfront that we reach out to our neighbors to be able to support because of the emergency. They've been able to do this. Ghanaians will learn to trust more. And I think that's where we have the problem,
But Oliver, what would you say is the cure to this passiveness? So something happens and we don't interrogate, we don't push it too much, and then everybody sort of falls back. What is going to cure this passiveness which permeates everything that we do?
It's a genuine question of interest and research about. I mean, the British did not call us the model colony for no reason. But that's our general attitude is to be a yes sir people. But also decades of, and this is one of the things I always like to acknowledge, is that people who have seen several decades of anybody who stick their necks out getting chopped off, that culturally becomes ingrained to mind your business. You know, and so the toll and the cost of speaking up and activism and demanding answers, the cost is too high. Not everybody is going to be in the midst of a trial for treason against the Republic and doing these things. People look at those examples as like, not me.
I don't want this.
I don't want, right. So unless we're able to reduce the cost of speaking up, we've never been able to get anywhere. I'll give a final example. Right. I've been dealing with a group of whistleblowers from Ghana Health Service, where there was, financial misappropriation of Gavi funds that were given to the ministry, the Ghana Health Service, and for years now, like they are the ones being consistently victimized. Right, like a number of them, they went to bring in the BNI to come and arrest them, claiming that they tampered with the website, like all kinds of unnecessary things. For years, I mean, a lot of those individuals are still, some were demoted out of Accra, some are sitting in the office, and for 2 years, they're not giving them any work because they dared question as internal auditors when they saw these things and raised it up and demanded answers. Even the matter was reported to the BNI, was reported to the police. I've sat down with the police with these individuals, and you speak with them for a few hours and they start crying because they cannot believe they felt like they were doing their duty when they realized what was happening. And then you have an institutional attempt to cover up because these are Gavi funds and we don't want the donor to know that we're misappropriating it. So the cost of people being willing to do this is like too much that they decide that, you know what, let me draw my paycheck, look the other way and go home.
The road tolls are coming back. I'm sure you heard about it.
Yeah.
Again, what do you say?
I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction. I mean, I remember I'm a person who loves road trips. And I remember there was a time I drove with my partner at the time from Geneva all the way down to Barcelona, and I paid driving through France almost 400 euros in tolls. So there's a logic to what tolls do and what they're supposed to support. What I am interested in is the reasons why it was taken away, because a lot of the reasons given were environmental reasons that were given to us.
No, there were also reasons that people were fighting.
The claims that people were doing and all kinds of things. Now, I am interested to see the extent to which those concerns have been addressed before it's admitted that we are really introducing the road toll. Is it that all the tolling system are going to be electronic so that the traffic build-up and all those things they claim are not going to happen? Or is like now we are scrambling for pennies everywhere that we want to be able to bring that back? I don't know, because it was claimed that we weren't generating enough anyway.
Right.
And one would think that the response of not generating enough is to increase it, but no, it was like determined that not only that there was traffic build up, there's environmental concerns around pollution around the communities, that this was affecting the communities, whether those were invented or also there's on the back of serious study. We know it wasn't, but at least let us pretend that we're providing answers to those things before we reintroduce those, I think.
What do you say to the idea that if you go to renew your roadworthy certificate, that should be a component of it, so you don't have to stop each time you get to the tolling point? Motorbike riders will pay, cars or vehicles of all forms will pay, and then we will have more money. Instead, what do you say to that?
So I think that a lot of people are thinking through, and it's a good proposition, that let's front load, I suppose, what would have been the road toll component into the vehicle re-registration process every time. It's a way of thinking about how do we effectively collect these tolls. You have to balance that with, I suppose, the cost of the infrastructural cost of building toll booths. You have to balance that against the interests of individuals who will be employed in managing the toll booth. But even as you're employing as well, also the cost of, because you're catering for not only what you're paying them, their pensions, risks of getting to job and all of those. That analysis would also be entailed in the conversation about how do we more efficiently gather the money that goes towards this. We could as well, like we do with everything, decide to put another fee or levy on top of the VAT like we do. There's so many ways in which government tries to raise revenue, and the hope is that it is thinking through what is the best way to be able to collect that as a society. I know that the road toll, for instance, is charged on vehicles that pass.
Right.
Hopefully, we can determine on the average what is the average collection that we do in terms
70 million a year.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we divide that upon, okay, how many vehicles are registered and re-registered? And what would that look like? Does it come to 20 CD or 15 CD? Yeah, that's all. I suppose what people want to see is a genuine attempt to think through the option.
People were fighting. That's what we are told. Which means that Ghanaians didn't necessarily understand what the finance minister said. We were going to convert the tolling points to public toilets and urinals. Do you think that the government owes the people of Ghana an apology?
Again, it's 1984. I don't think we're ever going to get it. To apologize is to admit that we were wrong. I think, if anything, they're going to tell us that we were wrong. Maybe we didn't understand what the government was doing in the beginning. So I think we should brace ourselves to apologize to the government.
You say more gaslighting could occur.
Absolutely. I mean, that's
right.
Once you prepare your mind for it, then you expect it's like, okay, I know.
But Johnny, you failed to mention, I don't know if you mentioned e-levy. That was another reason why.
Yeah, the e-levy was the reason.
Let's take the e-levy, we'll take the toll. It was almost like, negotiation tactics there. And now we still have e-levy and the tolls are coming back. We've missed out on a year and a half of collection, some almost 80 million a year. But surprisingly, you are all in agreement that we'll end up apologizing to them. It's wonderful.
But you know what? This is something we haven't even put up. Because we have a really, I must say, robust right information guys who are working with us. We already were able to collect how much we were earning prior to. Listen, we went back and forth with the Minister of Transport, and we have that information. I think we're going to put it out now. It's information we've had about 2 months ago. We have to treat it, and then before we release to the public. So we already had that information to inform the conversations about how much we have lost in the period that the toll has been taken off.
My closing question to you: Kennedy Japan wants to be president. The former Greek minister wants to be president. Adaini Mo, Engineer Kwabena Japan, Dr. Baumia. They all want to be president on behalf of the NPP, on the ticket of the NPP.
Yeah.
And they want to break the 8.
Yeah.
Who's your pick?
Okay, I didn't expect that question to end that way. I'm about to say, I have said, previously that I actually genuinely believe the president when he says that his legacy is to try to break the 8. I think, and I've said that, I think he's going to try to break the 8 with or without Ghanaian voters. My bet is more likely without Ghanaian voters.
How is he going to do that?
There's so many ways in which elections are won, whether it's through gerrymandering, whether it's through disenfranchisement. Listen, the Republican Party have several organizations that specialize in how you can win elections with the least voters as possible. I think that there's a lot of thinking going into how they can achieve it. I don't think they're throwing their hands in the air doing that. And so, yeah, I expect a lot more surprises. I think people are focused on the CI. I think there's a lot more that is going to happen. Now, in terms of the individuals that have come up, I think my preference on the MPP ticket will be somebody who has not served in this government at all.
Kwabena Japan, Adaini Mo.
Yeah, maybe somebody from France who have been on the sidelines. I know, for instance, Kwabena Japan is somebody who has, on several occasions, been pretty forthright in speaking like, no, things are not going the way they should, and things like that. It demands a certain level of honesty, and also persons who have not been involved in creating the kind of mess that we have, because it's a lot to come and tell Ghanaians that, we've done this and we've been part of this process, but yet we still have the answers. As the former Greek minister said that, he's going to prioritize agriculture. And I'm like, wait, what? So, yeah.
We have to go. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Oliver Bakavomawo. He is a convener of the Fix the Country movement. You have the favorite song of Kina Isoba?
No, I was going to say Wogbejeke.
Okay. Let's play Wogbejeke for you then.